Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for joining us today on That Desi Spark.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to jump in with a wide-ranging conversation around transparency, economic opportunity, foreign policy, and
Yeah, for
whatnot. Justice and freedom, fighting for both, is literally in your blood. Your grandfather was a big freedom fighter in India. Talk to me about how he's inspired you.
well, he's my hero, Amarnath Vidyalankar. He was in jail as part of Gandhi's independence movement. He worked for Lala Lajpat Rai, when he was a young man in his early 20s. His parents wanted him to go into the clothing business. He decided, no, I don't want to do that. I want to help fight for India's independence. And he taught school. He taught about Indian history. He wrote an editorial criticizing British rule and went to jail for 2 years in the 1930s and then again during Quit India's movement. And so he showed that a commitment to principle can move a nation, can change the world.
That's incredible. This is your ninth year in Congress.
10th year.
10th year.
10th year.
This is your 10th year in Congress. In your first term, you got two bills passed and signed into law. Your Endless Frontiers bill was the basis of the Science and Chips Act, which was signed into law by President Biden. And you worked across the party to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed.
Right.
You were very skilled at not just working across within the party lines, but across the aisle to get significant things done. As people feel dis- dismayed or disheartened by the lack of bipartisanship, you're showing that it's not dead. How do you get this stuff done with people who have very different views on these issues as you do?
Well, some of it is relationships. I treat people with respect, with civility. I don't go and make ad hominem attacks
Mhm.
on Twitter. I try to develop relationships, and then I look for common ground. So the most significant thing we did is we passed the Epstein Transparency Act.
Mhm.
Donald Trump's literally signed my bill in 2025 to get the Epstein Files released, and that's because I had a long-term relationship with Thomas Massey. I built relationships with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace. We got a huge coalition and we put the pressure to get it through the House and the Senate. And then I've had enormous success in technology legislation. We got the Chips and Science Act passed to bring semiconductor manufacturing back here and semiconductor design to make sure we're leading. We got the Inflation Reduction Act passed to fund the importance of solar and wind and renewable energy. And I didn't, that wasn't my bill, but I played a contributory role with the negotiations with Manchin. And we've had a lot of bills passed that help bring technology into government, to get rid of the fraud, the waste, the inefficiencies, to make technology a part of government being a better deliverer of services.
Mhm. I want to go back to Epstein for a second. Why did you pick this fight? Because it's so much more than just getting a bill passed, but it's about accountability. What have you learned from the survivors that fueled your desire to get this bill passed?
Well, it's personal for me. They sat in my office. They talk about how they were raped, abused at the age of 14, 15. Someone said it's like putting it in a box and you push it down, but it never goes away. It can resurface. I've seen people break down in tears in my office. And there are 1,200 of these survivors. They were raped as young girls. They often came from working class families, immigrant families. They were taken to an island, paraded around naked at the age of 14, 15, 16. And rich and powerful men did this, and they didn't face any consequences. And when these girls complained to the FBI or police, they were saying, "You can't do anything. You can't. You can't touch these people." And so the American people are tired of it. They're tired of protecting pedophiles. They're tired of protecting rich and powerful men like all the Epstein class who have committed these abuses, and we are finally going to get justice for these survivors. And so many people come up to me and they say, "Well, I faced sexual assault. I faced abuse. Here's what happened to me." For the first time, I think survivors in our country are feeling seen, heard.
What does accountability and justice look like for them?
Prosecution for the worst ones, and if we can't prosecute because of the time that's passed, then at least public accountability. They shouldn't have buildings named after them. They shouldn't be sitting on the boards of directors of prestigious companies. They shouldn't be getting awards and be appointed to prestigious universities. A public accountability for the people who either raped these young girls or covered it up.
It's been weeks since the bill was signed into law, and the Justice Department has only released a fraction of the documents that was stipulated in the law. How are you feeling right now about their progression of releasing the documents, and what are you going to do to keep things moving along?
Well, they haven't been complying with the law. They've been covering it up. But just today, Pam Bondi basically sent an apologetic letter to the Southern District of New York, saying, "We know we're behind schedule, but we're going to produce this. We promise you we're going to produce this." And that's because Thomas Massey and I intervened, and we said to the judge, "Appoint a special master to get these documents out." And it's also because I've been going on a MAGA podcasts that have a MAGA following, like Sean Ryan, who's saying the White House is protecting pedophiles. I voted for the president, but this is not what I voted for. So they are getting a lot of pressure from their own base. As we just saw the president at a factory floor, a 40-year-old factory worker saying, "Stop protecting pedophiles." This is broken through in the culture. It is
Mhm.
something that the American people are sickened by, and it's not going away.
If the Justice Department doesn't produce the documents in a timely manner based after that apology, what legislative tools are in place to continue to push them?
Well, we are the Southern District of New York can
Mhm.
order that. They can appoint a special molester to oversee the documents and the release. We can hold Pam Bondi in contempt, inherent contempt, where she's fined, and people in the Justice Department could go to jail, if not in this administration, the future administration, if they are obstructing justice and not complying with our law.
You had talked a lot about working across the aisle and going and speaking on podcasts that typical Democrats don't go to. Steve Bannon has even spoken about very positively of you and even said he wants to get you over to the MAGA side. What have you learned in the conversations you've had with people with very different views than you about where we can find common ground and how we find common ground again?
Going after the corruption, having elite accountability, the people who got us into these wars overseas, who outsource jobs, who
Mhm.
uh, aren't playing by the rules, who've rigged the system, making sure they're held accountable, making sure that we're focused on working class folks who haven't had a decent life because the childcare costs are high, healthcare costs are high, the jobs aren't paying as much to support a family, the education costs are high. What do we need to do to make the American dream possible, something I was able to achieve, my wife was able to achieve? How do we make that possible for people across this country, people who grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where I did? That is the challenge, and I think when it comes to that, there are a lot of people who agree that the system hasn't been working and we need something different.
You call yourself a progressive capitalist. With inequality on the rise, what will happen if we don't intervene in terms of policy in the next 5 years? Will we hit a breaking point?
Well, what we're going to see is the decline of the working and middle class. 70% of Americans believe the American dream is dead. How do we create good paying jobs that you can support a family? How do we tackle the cost of healthcare, where it's just 20% of our GDP and is bankrupting families with the premium costs, the deductible costs? How do we deal with the childcare costs? 10, $15,000, $20,000 for one child often.
Mhm,
How do we deal with the education costs, the cost of going to college, $20,000, even a public school?
mhm.
These are the big items that are making people feel like, can I really live in America? Can I afford to live the American dream?
If you could pass a sweeping piece of legislation through the House, through the Senate, and get it signed into law focused on income inequality or inequality in general, what would that bill look like?
It would be a Marshall Plan for America, which would create good jobs across this country, whether those are good jobs in technology, whether those are good jobs in the childcare economy and the elder care and home care economy, whether those are good jobs in the factories and the new factories that are going to require robotics. How do we have high paying, good paying jobs in every community, and particularly for young people coming out of high school, coming out of college? That's a big challenge for them.
It represents Silicon Valley and arguably the largest employers where there is a it's not a monolith. There are people with a vast different wide group of views. How would you work with your district and the leaders within it to spur this plan? Because it can't be all driven by the public sector. It has to be public private working together.
Well, I have done it. We partnered with NVIDIA to create jobs in historically black colleges. I partnered with Google to create jobs in places like Des Moines Community College, $5,000 a year scholarship for kids. At 9 month course, they end up with a 65 to $85,000 job. So we have partnered to show that you can inspire business leaders to create jobs across this country, high paying jobs, create economic growth across this country.
So we talk a lot about what we could do internally, but something you've been very vocal about is how much we spend on defense and on unnecessary wars abroad and how that funding could, help rebuild our middle class in the States. You've been consistent about being against unnecessary wars since you were 14 years old when you published an op ed in opposition to the Gulf War.
Right.
That was 1991. It is 2026. With our action in Venezuela, with our threatened action in Greenland, we still seem to be focused on wars for oil.
It's sad to me. It's sad to me because we should be focused on the health and education of our people, our communities. Instead, we're taking other countries' oil and costing our country so much money and risking our troops. We're threatening to get into another war in the Middle East. We're threatening Denmark with the attack on Greenland. I want an America which is focused on building up our education, building up our healthcare, building up our childcare, focused on the potential of every American town, every American citizen. And I do believe that the American people, that's where they are. They're tired of these endless wars. They're tired of a Pentagon budget that is 56% of our total budget.
What can Congress do to act as a check against this administration engaging in these, what appears to be unlawful wars, with not getting congressional approval for some of these military actions that have now passed that 60-day mark?
Well, Congress needs to pass a war powers resolution. Bernie and I had the first war powers resolution that passed, Bernie Sanders, to stop the war in Yemen. We were
Mhm.
funding basically the refueling of planes that Saudi was using to bomb Yemen. It was one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes. I led that effort. Now I'm leading with Thomas Massey the effort to stop bombing in Iran preemptively so the president doesn't get us into a war. And Jim McGovern is leading the effort to stop us from getting into Venezuela and staying there as an occupying power.
What concerns do you have about the president's remarks about talking about occupation for profit? And is there a way to actually check him when it seems to be a reactive response from Congress than a proactive?
It's a neo form of colonialism. I mean, we don't engage in gunboat diplomacy in the 21st century. You can't just go into another country because they're a weaker army and say, I want to take your stuff. I want to take your oil. I want to sell that to the world. It is the type of colonial model of the world that we need to move beyond.
You have an anti war position that feels like a rarity in the House, but doesn't feel as out of touch with the rest of the country. You found allies across the aisle with Thomas Massey and Senator Rand Paul in advocating against intervention. Are you alone in this position in the Congress, or are there more representatives and senators who also have an anti war stance and may not be as vocal about it?
I believe there's a growing consensus that we don't want these overseas wars, that it's costing America too much. It cost us $6 trillion being in Iraq, being in Afghanistan. We keep voting for presidents that promise not to get us into endless wars. Then they get to Washington, they get co opted by the foreign policy establishment. That is not the right way forward.
What can we do to grow this movement against endless wars and start building better, more robust policy around it?
We need more people to get involved in the process, to elect representatives who are going to say that they have the guts to stand up to the defense industrial base, to the defense contractors, to the powerful interests that make a lot of money of us getting into wars, and a foreign policy establishment that is quite militaristic. I believe that there's a new generation
Mhm.
that wants peace. And wants us to be focused on building up our communities, our country, that doesn't want us spending all our money killing people overseas.
I want to talk about Greenland for a second in particular, because at first it seems random, but when you think about what Greenland offers, a strategic position in the Arctic, rare earth minerals, oil, it makes sense. And it seems to be falling into the president's spheres of influence approach to foreign policy than the typical world order that was established after World War II of respecting a country's sovereignty. You represent Silicon Valley, which leverages and needs rare earth minerals to grow and scale their technologies. Was there a legitimate way to partner with Greenland to benefit of both Greenland and Denmark and the United States that you would pursue differently than this current policy?
Yes, and Denmark has offered that. I mean, we should have a Manhattan Project for rare earth independence. Or China has 17 rare earths, and they have developed that over decades by investing in the technology of how to develop that. We should be investing in the new clean technology here in the United States, but around the world, partnering with Greenland and Denmark, partnering with Australia, partnering with Canada, partnering with Chile, and have a vision for the world that says the world shouldn't be dependent on rare earths in China.
Denmark is a NATO ally, so if the president continues to push this Greenland issue, What's that going to do with NATO as a whole?
Well, it would crush NATO. I mean, it would basically dismantle NATO.
Mhm.
And that's why you have Republicans like Don Bacon saying if the president actually goes through with invading Denmark, he would vote to impeach the president. He will lose Republican support if he goes down that road.
I want to talk about Iran because the president has authorized military strikes on Iran in the past and recently. You've introduced the War Powers Resolution to try to stop him. And now that we've seen the images coming out of Iran of how many protesters have been murdered in over the past couple weeks, the president has threatened, quote unquote, very strong action in response. And Iran's accusing us of destabilizing their government. How do we get out of this?
Well, Iran, what's happening is outrageous. I mean, they're basically shooting unarmed protesters. It's a brutal regime. It is a regime that has no regard for human rights. And we need to stand up for the unarmed protesters in terms of our moral sentiments with that. We need to demand that they restore the internet, that they restore communication. But that doesn't mean the United States should strike. If the United States goes in, then we actually will stoke Iranian nationalism. They'll say, look, this isn't an organic protest. This is the big powers intervening and will make the situation worse.
It's a very small needle to thread. What specifically can Congress do to temper the temperature, to lower the temperature, and to focus on a cooler heads prevailing and a better strategy for peace?
I believe that we need to get behind Yasmin Asari's resolution, which I have, which condemns what's going on, clearly speak out against the regime's shooting. It was align with the protesters, work with the international agencies like the UN to support the protesters, but make it clear that the United States isn't going to be leading some kind of military effort into Iran.
It's a very scary time to be in the United States. What can Congress do to be a check on what the president is doing, what appears to be unconstitutional?
Congress needs to act. I mean, people. I'm the son of immigrants. My parents came here from India. So many immigrants are afraid. They're afraid in a way they haven't been before. You have in Minnesota one a tenth of the entire ICE force there, 2,000 agents, and you only have 1% of those who are undocumented. The reality is they're going after American citizens. They're knocking on doors of American citizens, pulling American citizens out of their cars. We need to cut the funding to ICE. That $150 billion funding that was given to ICE needs to be cut so that they're not a lawless agency until there's accountability, until they don't wear masks, until they have visible identification, until they follow the Constitution, until they have body cameras. Jasmine Crockett and I had that bill.
What can constituents do to push for that?
They need to be out there and mobilize. It
Mhm.
takes some courage. I mean, they need to protest. They need to be out there, hear the voice, ally with other immigrants, call out for constitutional rights, be politically engaged. This is a time for courage to say this is not the America that we want. We don't have law enforcement agents going and harassing citizens, going and harassing and assaulting immigrants in a way that violates their human rights.
Not just assaulting or, attacking, but in the case of what happened in Minneapolis, killing.
Well, Renee Good was an execution. I mean, the officer shot cold,
Yeah.
shot her dad. Now, you can say that okay, we shouldn't have people going and disrupting law enforcement with cars, but the answer to that is not capital punishment. The answer to that is to have de-escalatory force, only the force that is necessary. In this case, you had someone basically shot and killed an American citizen.
Are we in a constitutional crisis right now?
Well, we're in a crisis where we have a president who's lawless, who's acting in unconstitutional ways. It's a president declining in popularity. It's a president who's going to lose Congress. It's a president who's going to see Hakeem Jeffries as speaker. But it is a president who's going to do whatever he can get away with. And what is needed is strong leadership with moral clarity on the other side saying no. And that has to be in coalition with other Republicans.
How are you gonna get more Republicans on board to start respecting the rule of law and to start respecting the Constitution and the oaths they swore?
Well, by building the kind of coalition we did with the Epstein Act, that's what is required, and I'm doing that with Don Bacon when it comes to Venezuela or some of the foreign policy issues. Working with Ruben Gallegos, working with Republicans to make sure we don't go into Greenland, and we need to do that now when it comes to the dismantling of agencies. So we fought hard so that there weren't drastic cuts in NSF, NIH.
You've talked about how you represent more teachers and firemen than billionaires in your district. And you're very popular in your district from all of your constituents. How is it representing the wealthiest and those who are struggling with increasing income inequality, especially in the Bay Area where affordability is becoming an increasingly worse issue? And being a congressman to all versus, the perception can be for other representatives catering to a very specific group.
That's hard. I mean, I've called for a new tech social contract. I said to whom much has been given, at least a little is expected.
Mhm.
And I love the fact that we have creators and builders who take extraordinary risk and build things that help all of us. But we need to make sure that translates into every Californian, every American having a stake, having basic health care, having education, having childcare, building enough housing so that they can afford house or a rent, not having private equity buy up single family homes, not having a situation where rents are going up 5, 10% a year, not having a situation where they don't have health care, where they're being denied basic access to doctors while we have the richest country producing more wealth than ever in the world. So I championed this idea of a new tech social contract in Silicon Valley, saying celebrate the entrepreneurship and innovators, but I want everyone to benefit from it.
Can we go into more detail of what that contract looks like in terms of policy?
Medicare for all, free public college, $10 a day childcare, a Marshall Plan for America with an industrial bank, 1,000 trade schools, workers getting some sense of ownership and stock, making sure that we have a living wage, making sure that every person basically has a health, education, and job to succeed in this country.
That sounds great, but how do we pay for it?
Well, we have to cut some of the excessive defense budget. We can tax people who have extraordinary wealth more. We need to cut the inefficiencies and fraud in government and the waste in government. And I think if we do all of that, we will have an ability in the richest country of the world to have everyone have a healthcare, education, and economic independence.
Justice and opportunity for all. If you could go back to your 14-year-old self who wrote that op-ed, who had a clarion vision of what America should be like, is there something you would tell him?
Well, most people don't read op-eds. I thought the president was going to read my op-ed when it said 14-year-olds read this 14-year-old's love stories. Now, right in the New York Times, the president still doesn't read it. I think that the idealism there is one that no matter how jaded you get, no matter how cynical you get into what I just said, you have to find a way to retain. And how do you retain that? That's what I would tell my 14-year-old self, that you're going to face a lot of obstacles in that idealism, but find a way to cling on to it.
I have one last question. As a Philly kid, Eagles or 49ers?
I was for the 49ers. I grew up watching the Buddy Ryan Eagles with Jerome Brown and Reggie White and Randall Cunningham. But Levi Stadium is in my district. And Brock Purdy, I'm hoping he'll have a successful outing against the Seahawks. Someone I was reading today, he's 4-0, I think, against the Seahawks. So I'm hoping that we'll pull it off this weekend.
A very diplomatic answer, but go birds anyway. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Congressman, for
This is
sitting
great.
down with
I
us.
appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.